everybody, welcome to part 2 in a series of videos for Three Kingdoms Redux. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to play the game of Three Kingdoms. Now, Three Kingdoms is a 3-player only worker placement game, and the average play time is going to be about 2.5 hours. Early learning games are probably going to take a little bit longer, but once everybody gets familiar with all the rules, it's going to play a little bit quicker, especially when you realize that it is possible to end the game earlier. It's not mandatory that you play for all 12 rounds because the game does have some other victory conditions that can end the game earlier, and those victory conditions are pretty darn plausible and very achievable if you do concentrate your forces and concentrate all your victory conditions, or concentrate your intentions toward gaining those victory conditions. Now in Three Kingdoms Redux, this is a worker placement game with a little bit of a twist because players have to actually auction for the locations. It's not simple enough for you to send one of your workers to one of these different locations to try to gain access to those abilities. It's actually going to be a little bit of a bidding system because every single one of your generals is going to have 2 statistics. They're going to have a statistic that's going to allow them to work on the less militaristic kind of worker locations, more the affairs of state, such as trying to increase your state, trying to do various things such as getting your granaries going, getting your treasuries going, and they're going to have statistics that are going to help them work towards those certain kinds of locations. And they're also going to have a statistic for combat, which is going to be towards the more militaristic locations on the board, which is going to allow them to start accruing various different things that are going to work towards getting the victory conditions of the game. Now there's 3 different ways the game can end early, and if the game is going to not end by one of those victory conditions, the game will definitely end at the end of the 12 turns. So the game does play through 12 turns unless you bring about one of the earlier victory conditions. Now the earlier victory conditions is if one player can manage to become the new Emperor of China, they are going to immediately end the game at the end of the turn. It doesn't matter what turn that is, whether it's the 5th turn, the 8th turn, or the 10th turn, the game will come immediately to an end. Also, one player can manage to get all their granaries and all their marketplaces into play, which means they have level 5 on the granaries and level 5 on the marketplace. That is also going to bring about the final ending of the game. And finally, players can end the game if they manage to get all the generals out, because remember, this is a battle over China, and players are trying to become the new rulers of China. So if they can manage to get all the generals out with their armies and manage to conquer 5 different of these singular regions out here along the board, as soon as they manage to conquer 5 different regions, move their generals in those locations with armies. Now you do have to have armies attached. I'm just trying to show you this very quickly. But if you manage to get 5 different border regions conquered, you're also going to bring about the end game at the end of that round. So there's 3 ways the game can end early: through military, through commerce, or become the next emperor, or the game is going to go for a full 12 turns. Now this is a victory point based game, so all the players are basically vying to get victory points, and you get victory points for various different things you can do throughout the game. As you start conquering these border locations, you're going to start gaining victory points on the victory point track, and this is basically what you see is what you get kind of victory points. You're going to get these amount of victory points at the end of the game. You're also getting victory points depending on how much you manage to raise yourself through the hierarchy of the royalty of their leadership for all of China, whether you become a grand general, whether you become a prime minister. Of course, if you manage to work your way all the way up to become an emperor, you're going to get the most amount of victory points for doing that. Like I said, you're also going to get victory points for military as long as you keep your military out in these locations. And while you can't lose access to these locations once you conquer them, they are an extreme drain on your economy, constantly forcing you to put out food and forcing you to constantly keep money resources going to keep these armies stationed in these locations. If you cannot pay for these armies to stay located in those locations, you're going to slowly start accruing negative victory points. We're going to hamper your army and take away victory points at the end of the game. You're also going to earn victory points for conquering these locations. If you conquer them with the correct armies, they're going to give you extra victory points. Of course, you can conquer them with any kind of army that your general can lead, but your general is very good at leading specific kinds of armies. And if you conquer these regions with a general who is very powerful at leading those specific kind of armies, instead of getting 0 victory points for conquering those locations, you're actually going to get a singular victory point for those locations. You're also going to earn victory points for managing to get good relations with your border tribes. If you get your border tribes to give you extra way that they see you as a leader for your state, they're going to give you extra victory points at the end of the game. And finally, you're going to get victory points for adding unification cards to your state and also adding separation cards to your state. Now, unification cards can make your state more powerful and give you extra abilities, while these separation cards are going to give you extra victory points. The trick here is separation cards become more and more difficult to get into play the further along you go into the game, meaning that you want to get the separation cards into play as early as possible, because eventually some of those cards become impossible to play because they all have prerequisites that become more and more difficult to keep hold of as the game keeps going. Before I show you how to play Three Kingdoms Redux, there's a couple quick core concepts you need to understand that's going to make the rest of the game a lot easier to understand. First thing you understand is that there are untrained armies and trained armies, and this is basically the same token. It's a double-sided token. One side shows your army units with a grass or wicker style shield and helmet. That's going to be your untrained armies. Then the other side is going to have a metal shield and helmet. That's going to be your trained armies. Then every one of your armies has the potential to be equipped with a weapon once they become a trained army. So you can train one of your armies and equip it with a crossbow. You can train them and equip them with spears. You can train them and equip them with horses, and finally they can be trained, and once they're trained, then be equipped and have them stationed on boats, which has allowed them to go out there and attack some of these border regions that can only be accessible by boats. You're also going to notice that every single one of these border regions has a symbol showing which kind of military armies can attack those locations. So the only kind of unit that can ever attack this province right here is a unit that's equipped with crossbows. So if I have a unit, an army equipped with a crossbow, they can come out here and they can attack this province. If they move in there with one of my generals, I'm going to start earning victory points for controlling that province. This location we see that can only be attacked by spearmen. So if I have an army equipped with spears, led by a general, and they can come out here and attack this province, which will start earning me victory points towards the end of the game. And finally, this province right here we see has a crossbow symbol on it, so the only one who can gain access to that one again would be an army equipped with a crossbow and led with a general. Now there's 4 different kinds of provinces. You have provinces that can be attacked by crossbows, provinces that can be attacked by spear, provinces that can be attacked by horseback, and finally provinces that can only be accessed by boat. Every single one of these provinces has one symbol on it only. That's the only kind of army that can ever attack that province. So if I, for example, have a army that's equipped with crossbows and they're led by my general right here, they can never attack this province right here, even though I have a powerful enough army to do so. They can never attack it because the only people who can attack this province are armies equipped with a spear. So if I have that, I can attack this province, which is going to give me victory points. The next thing you need to understand about this game is that every single player is going to have one lord representing their army. And every single Lord card is going to say the Lord on the back of it. And every single player starts with the same Lord every single time we play the game. Every army, Wei, Wu, and Shu, has a different Lord for their specific army only. And they also have access to generals that only they can access throughout the game. Every single general is going to have 3 different statistics on it. They're going to have a statistic for administration, which is going to help them gain locations that have an administration requirement. Every single general is going to have a statistic for combat. That's going to help them in auctioning for locations that have a combat requirement and also going to battle out to battle for these various provinces. And every single general is going to have a statistic showing how many armies they can lead. Now the first 2 statistics, the administration and the combat, can have a value anywhere from 1 to 5. And the third statistic, that how many armies you can lead, is going to have a total of 1 or 2. And it's the total amount of armies you can ever lead with that specific general. Now, when you lead an army, both of your armies have to be equipped exactly the same. So if I have managed to train this army right here, and I have this general right here, I could not have him lead an army of crossbows and an army of infantry. They need to have an army of both having the exact same weapons, whether it happens to be crossbows, whether it happens to be infantry, whether it happens to be horses, or whether it happens to be boats. And every single one of those armies has to be equipped in that specific way. So I would need 2 boats, I would need 2 cavalry, 2 infantry, or finally 2 crossbows if I was going to take this general who can lead 2 armies and go out there and attack some of these provinces. So both my armies have to be equipped with boats, both of them have to be equipped with horses, both of them have to be equipped as infantry, or both of them have to be equipped with crossbows. Now I don't have to have 2 armies. I can, if I want, only have 1 army, but that's going to be worth less victory points every single round because the way the game works, the more armies you have stationed, that's going to give you more victory points every single round. Now, every single general can lead any one of the 4 different kinds of army units, but they're going to get a specific bonus if they lead one of the armies that they're specifically good at. Now, every one of these generals is going to have 1 or 2 army types that they are specifically good at leading. So this general right here, who is the lord for the Wu army or the Wu state province, we know that they're good at leading infantry and they're also good at leading armies that have boats. Now, I can lead an army that has crossbows if I want. There's no penalty for it. But if I lead an army that is infantry, since I'm good at infantry, and if I attack a province that requires infantry to defeat it, such as this province right here, if I do lead my general to attack this province with my infantry, since I'm good at infantry, I'm specialized in infantry, and this province requires infantry to take it out, when I take the victory point token from this location, instead of it being worth 0 victory points, it's actually worth 1 victory point because I specialize in that army type. Now, as another example, let's say I attack this province right here, which requires crossbows to attack it, And let's say I happen to have 2 army units that are both equipped with crossbows. Since I am not proficient with crossbows, it's not my specialty, I can still attack this province with these 2 armies that require crossbows to take them out. I would still get the victory point token for conquering this province, but I would not get the 1 victory point side. Since I'm not proficient in crossbows, I'm only going to get 0 victory points. Now, why would you want to go after a province that's going to give you 0 victory points? Well, every single province you conquer or occupy is going to help you get increased amounts of money for your empire and possibly increased amounts of food to feed your armies as they're stationed. So while you may not get the extra victory points, it still may be a good idea to start attacking these different locations just to get this token, and this token can represent extra food or extra money for your empire. But I'll explain that when we get to that point. Three Kingdoms is an extremely asymmetrical game, and every single player is going to get a different setup and access to different generals that only they can access, and every one of these generals comes with a specific power that's specific to that exact general. And of course, this goes without saying, if any of the generals has a rule that breaks the rules of the game, well, they do that quite a bit in this game, and do know that the generals, whatever rules happens to be on every one of those generals, is going to take precedence over any rule that happens to be in the game. Now, every single player is going to get one of these setup sheets that's going to tell them what their specific setup is, and every one of these players' setups is just a little bit different than every single other player in the game. Every single player starts with their own unique lore that's very unique to their own faction specifically. Every single player gets to pick a certain amount of generals that's going to start with their starting army. And also, every single player on the back of every one of these sheets has a player aid that's going to list exactly which powers their opponent's generals possess. So, since this is a player aid for the player we see as the Wu player, on the back side it's going to list all the powers of all the Shu generals and all the powers of the Wei generals. So we start planning and knowing exactly what they want to do, because when the generals come into play the very first time, when they're very first recruited, we're not going to know what generals that specific player is brought into play. So we can kind of watch their strategies, watch their tactics, and try to deduce what they're doing until they reveal those generals with their special powers to make our lives much more difficult. At the start of the game, all the players are going to start with 4 of these state markers. Now, 3 of them are the larger size, and the 4th one is the smaller size. Well, we won't worry about the smaller size ones yet, but do know that the smaller ones are the ones that are going to be used on the action track. But what we do need to know is that players need to put out 1 of these in every one of these sections of the board. First, they need to put 1 out in the bid track, then they need to put 1 out in the military track, and finally they need to put 1 in their rank track. The bid track order is always going to start the game the exact same way every time you play the game. So the Wei player is always going to be player number 1. The Wu player is always going to be player number 2. And finally, the Shu player always starts the game as player number 3. And there's a nice helpful reminder at the bottom of the track here for the player number 3. Every single round, whoever player number 3 is always going to control the alliance token. And if you ever forget, there is a nice helpful reminder at the bottom of the board. And not to segue into my review, but there's lots of helpful reminders all over this board to constantly remind you about all the actions and when things change up, which is really, really cool, because you can basically play the entire game without referencing the entire rulebook at all, except for the reminders for your generals in case you ever forget the numbers. But that's one easy chart to completely remember. Anyways, every player starts the military track on rank 0. Everybody starts the rank track also on rank number 0. Every single player needs to start with 5 of their granaries. With the granary side, which looks like it's grown grass, that's going to be facing down. And we're going to have that for all 5 of our granaries. All of our marketplaces are going to start with our marketplace facing side down on our track. And we all start with 5 marketplaces. That's going to go for all 3 of our state nations. And then the Wei player needs to make sure they draw 6 general cards, and they get to keep 4 of the ones they drew. The other 2 are going to be discarded and returned to their deck, which may come out at a later date because we are going to shuffle that deck again. And then finally, the Wu player is going to draw 6 general cards also, but they only get to keep 3 of them. And finally, the Shu player also is going to draw 6 general cards, but they only get to keep 2 of those general cards. So you're basically, every player is going to draw 6 generals, and they get to keep a certain amount of generals. The rest of them are going to be discarded, returned to their deck, and the deck will be shuffled up at a later time. And they may get some of those generals at a later date, depending on the luck of the draw. Once every single player has chosen however many generals they get to take, whether it's the Wu player keeping 3 of their generals, they're going to put all these generals, they're going to put them face down so the other players do not get to see which generals we picked. Then we need to go through all of our tokens and find all the matching generals that match every single of our cards. And we're also going to place those generals face down on top of these cards, again, so the other players do not know which generals we have. Every single time we recruit generals, they're all going to come into play face down, so other players have no idea which generals we recruit. And there's a nice reminder on the round track telling us every single round where we're going to recruit generals. We're going to recruit in the 3rd round, we're going to recruit in the 5th round, and finally we're going to recruit generals in the 9th round. So remember, every time you recruit, your generals will be face down. Any generals you don't pick, go back to your draw deck, which will be shuffled up, and you basically put it off to the side because you're not going to have to worry about it again until we come to the point where you can potentially get more generals. After all the players have their granaries and all their marketplaces, every single player gets to start with their current relations with their tribe at a certain level. And it's pre-printed on the board if you ever forget it, but the Wu player starts at level 6, the Wei player starts at level 5, and finally the Shu player starts at level 7. After that's done, we need to get our randomizer cards for every one of our nations. Every single one of our states gets to start with 3 unification cards. So Wei gets 3 unification cards, Wu gets 3 unification cards, and then finally Shu also gets 3 unification cards. But here's where the trick is going to change things up. The Wei player gets 1 separation card, and these, remember, are bonus victory points that we're going to earn at the end of the game. So the more of these cards we get, the earlier we get them, the more potential victory points we get during the game. The Wu player gets to draw 2 separation cards, and finally the Shu player gets to draw 3 separation cards. There's only a couple more quick things we need to grab for all of our players. The Wei player starts with 3 rice and 3 gold. The Wu player starts with 4 rice, 4 gold, and 1 popular support token. I'll explain those in just a little bit. And then finally the Shu player gets to start with 5 rice, 5 gold, and 2 popular support tokens. All the players are ready to go. The only thing left to do is make sure we put a 0 victory point token in every one of these border locations that we're going to be combating for, which is also, don't forget, that's a possible ending condition for the victory of the game. Then what we need to do is we need to figure out exactly which one of the 2 center locations are going to be randomized. And we also need to make sure that we put the Emperor token. I like to place it right here on the board so we never forget about it. But we need to place it, and then we need to figure out which these 2 center spaces are going to be, because every single round they're going to change whether they're a military space or if they happen to be an administration space. And the easiest way to do that, just take the 2 tokens, and the first one that drops is going to be for popular support. So we know in this game, in this example tutorial, popular support is going to be military, so that means automatically controlling the Han Emperor makes that an administration space. And every single round, at the end of every single one of the rounds, these 2 spaces are going to flip over, so every new round they're going to have a new requirement of what's required to gain control of those locations. That's all there is to say of the game. We have all of our decks all shuffled up. Everything's ready to go. Now to show you how to play Three Kingdoms Redux. Every single round of the game is going to be made up of a conflict phase and then a resolution phase, and that's the end of the round. That's very, very important, because at the end of the round, players, some of the generals get extra special powers that occur at the end of the round. So you have your conflict, then your resolution, and then any end of round powers will go off. And then you're going to do the upkeep and maintenance, which will actually completely end the round. And then you're going to advance to the next round during the upkeep and maintenance. And that's going to end the round. Then you're going to start the next round over. You're going to keep doing this until you either go through 12 rounds, somebody manages to become the emperor, somebody manages to conquer a total of 5 different border regions, of the border regions that they have access to, or somebody manages to get all 5 of their marketplaces into play and all 5 of their farms into play. And once that's done, that's going to signal that that'll be the final round of the game if you haven't made it through all 12 rounds. As soon as one of those endgame conditions are triggered, you're going to finish off that round. Then you add up all the victory points and figure out who exactly is the winner of the game. At the start of the conflict phase, the players are going to get the chance to gain extra generals as long as we're currently in round 3, 5, or 9. If we're not in one of those rounds, we're actually going to skip this part of the conflict phase. But for round 3, 5, or 7, we need to, 3, 5, or 9, we need to start each conflict phase by picking new generals for every one of our states. And it's going to be different depending on which round we're currently in. But if we're currently in round number 3, the Wei player gets to draw 3 generals and keep only 1. The Wu player gets to draw 4 generals and keep 2. And finally, the Shu player gets to draw 4 generals and also keep 2. If we happen to be in the 5th round, the Wei player is going to draw 3, keep 1. Wu is going to draw 3, keep 1, and Shu is going to draw 4 and keep 2. And finally, in the 9th round, all of our generals get to draw 3 and only keep 1. So as you see, in the start of the game, the Shu player doesn't start with as many generals as the Wei player, but by the time we get to the 9th round, every single player should have the same amount of generals in play. Next, the player in 3rd place, and there's always a nice reminder down here for the bid order track, but the player in 3rd place gets to pick the alliance space. Now, the alliance space can only be one of the 10 center areas. You can't use the alliance space for any of the battle arenas or for any of the tribal relation spaces. You can only use it for the 10 outline spaces. There's a nice friendly reminder to remind you that you cannot use the alliance token for the popular support, and you cannot use it for the control Han Emperor location either. But basically, player number 3 gets to pick this spot. Of course, they can verbally discuss with player number 2 who they will be in alliance with this turn, and again, that's going to change up every turn. It's always going to be player 2 and player 3 who are always in alliance, and player 3 gets to pick the alliance spot. And basically what this means is when they pick the alliance spot, that means they're both going to reap the benefits of that location if they both put a general in that location. As a matter of fact, they're also going to add up the totals of their general for that location, and that location only, which means it's going to be much harder for the player in first place to gain access to that location, because the two players in alliance are going to add up their general strengths, pretty much guaranteeing they can lock in that spot, unless the player in spot number 1 wants to really throw a lot of generals to try to get access to one location. Anyways, the player who picks the alliance spot, there's a couple different rules we have to follow when we pick the alliance spot. One I've already mentioned, you cannot pick the one popular support location or the control Han Emperor location. The second thing is you cannot pick an alliance spot that was picked on the prior turn. So if on turn number 1 we pick recruit armies as our alliance spot, that means we cannot. We need to pick one of the other 9 locations on future rounds, but if we pick, for example, on next round we pick demand tribute, starting on the 3rd round we could pick the recruit armies location again as the alliance location spot. But once the alliance location spot has been picked, it is now set for the round. Next, in player order, in the bid order listed on the bid track, players are going to rotate one at a time, placing one general on either one of the mutual locations, one of the battle locations, and it has to be the battle locations that are closest to their state. So the Wu player can only place generals on this battle location and this battle location. They cannot battle over on this location. If you ever forget, there's nice little flags to remind you that you can select those battle locations. So Wu can battle for these provinces right here. Wu can battle for these provinces, but since Wu does not have a flag here, that's a reminder that Wu cannot battle for those locations. So if it was the Wu's player to place one of their generals, they can place a general on any one of the 12 center locations. They can put a general on one of these 2 battle locations, or they can put a general on one of the improved tribal relations for their nation only. And this is a unique spot that's unique to every single player that no other player can access. So only the Wu player can access this tribal relations location. Only the Shu player can access this location, and finally only the Wei player can access that location. But the Wu and Wei player can battle for this location, Wu and Shu can battle for this location, and finally Wei and Shu can finally battle for this location and all the regions that have to be attached to this one. All the regions that have to be attached here are attached to this battle location, and all these regions right here are attached to this battle location only. Players are simply going to pick one of their generals, and again, you may want to use different generals at different times because they all have different special abilities on them, and they're going to be competing for these locations based on the stats they have, whether it's their administrative stats or their combat stats, and that's going to be judged by exactly which space they're going to. And if you ever forget, this center space is almost like a yin and a yang symbol because you have your combat locations, and then you have your administrative locations, then you have your 2 center locations, which are going to flip and flop every single turn exactly what's going to be available to get them. So all these locations in this part of the board right here are all going to be your administrative, and there's a scroll with a quill on it to remind you that those are administrative only locations. All your combat locations are going to be over here, and they're going to have a sword and a shield to remind you that those are combat locations. All your battle locations are also combat locations. There's a nice shield and sword to remind you that those are battle locations. And then finally, your improved tribal relations, you can put any one of your generals there, plus either gold, or you can put military units there, and that'll help improve your tribal relations. If you don't keep working your tribal relations every single turn, it's going to start going down step by step. And if it ever reaches number 1, you're going to start losing 3 victory points every single turn you don't work on your tribal relations. As players reveal their generals, they're going to place them face up on the board, and at that point we can start revealing who our generals are, and we start picking locations that we want to start competing for. So this general, we see that he has level 3 in administrative and level 4 in combat, so we know that he's going to be better at getting combat locations because he has a higher score. And the way this is going to work, remember, it's somewhat of an auction system. Whoever has the higher amount of points in that location is going to get it, and the ties are broken by whoever got there first. So if I place this general here with a combat level of 4, and then the Wu player gets their turn, and they place a combat general here of level 4 also, since the Wei player placed first, and since there's a tie between them, that means that the Wu player is currently losing the combination between these two because they have an equal number, and the offender is the person who got there first is the one who's going to win the ties. So if the Wu player wants to get this location, they need to add at least a second general to that location. But again, we have to place our generals one at a time, and as we place our generals, we reveal them, and we're going to continue going around the board as the players continue to add their generals onto the board, trying to get all these different locations to gain the benefits of these locations to help improve their empire. And if you ever get to a point where you don't have any generals to place, you're basically done. You can't place any more generals. Your turn is over. You can also decide to pass before all your generals are placed, but if you decide to pass one time and one time only, you basically cannot produce or place any more generals for the rest of the round. Although there are some generals who give you bonuses for placing, or I should say for not placing them on the board. So sometimes it may be a good decision to not place a general on the board because they're going to give you a special bonus for not placing them on your turn. Now when you place your generals down on these locations, some of them are going to have special powers, such as the leader of the Wu clan, the Wu state. He states that if he's the very first general you place on your turn, he's going to enter that location with a +1, which means his effective stats are going to be 4 and 5, which means he has a better chance of hanging on to those locations. You can also place a popular support token down with your general. Now when you place your general on the board, they have to be placed with the popular support token. You can't place a general down and then add popular support tokens at a later date. So it's basically a gamble sometimes if you want to make sure you lock in a location. Because if you place down these popular support tokens, after you resolve that space, these popular support tokens are going to be returned to the supply, so they are a one-time use thing. And they do have multiple uses. They can help you pay for some of these cards, but they can also help you lock in these locations on this area. Although do know that popular support tokens are not used for your battles. These are used for your armies only. Generals plus armies here, generals plus popular support tokens in the center of the board. After all the players have placed all their generals down, you're now done with the conflict phase. It's now time to go to the resolution phase. Now for the resolution phase, we need to figure out exactly which player was managed to win which one of these locations, and the player who lost needs to pull their general plus any tokens they had with them off the board back to their supply, except for popular support tokens. Remember, popular support tokens always go back to the general supply, while all the other units, including armies and army units, always return back to that player's supply. So we need to look at every single one of these locations and see if any of these locations currently have a conflict. And we see that the win popular support location currently has a conflict between two of the players. So we need to add up their total scores and the correct statistic between these two generals. So we see that win popular support is currently listed as a combat statistic. So we need to add up the combat statistic for both of our generals. We see that the Wu player currently has a 4 plus a 3 for a total of 7. And the Wei player currently only has a total of 4. So the Wei player has lost his bid. This general is going to be removed from the board and then be placed back in the Wei player's supply, and you just place it back on that general's card if you like, or put it off to the side, whatever is easier for you. But remember, don't forget to respect special abilities for all the generals, because all the generals do have lots of special abilities, can change things up quite a bit. After we figured out which one of these spaces have been won for which one of our players, if there's any generals who have been left face down from the prior turn on the control Han Emperor space, and that's only if they're left there from the prior turn, at this point they'd be returned back to that owner of that general. But since we don't have that in that instance, we're going to skip that spot. And now the next thing we need to do is we need to figure out what is going to be the turn order for the next turn. But before we do that, we need to start marking the current turn order for our actions that are going to be resolving on our resolution phase. Now to do so, we need to put our action tokens down in the exact same order as our bid tokens currently stand, and then we're going to rearrange our bid actions, but those won't take effect until the next turn. So to figure out how we're going to do this, we need to add up the total amount of bids every one of our players has won, and whoever won the most amount of bids is going to take first place. Whoever won the second amount of bids is going to get second place, and whoever won the least amount of bids is going to end up taking third place. Now the tiebreaker is going to be whoever has a higher military rank, and if players are still tied after you figure out military rank, we're simply going to default back to the Wei, Wu, and Shu order of things as the standard order for everything in this game. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how many bids every one of our players has won. So when we look at our red player, we see that they won 1, 2, 3 total bids. We see that the green player won 1, 2, 3 total bids, and we see that the blue player has won 4 total bids. So we see that both of the players are, the red and the green were beaten by the blue player, so it looks like blue. The white player is going to stay in player order number 1, and we now have a tie between red and green. So red and green need to look at their military levels and see that they're both tied currently at level 0. So the next thing we need to do is look at the next tiebreaker, which is always the order of Wei, Wu, and Shu. So we're going to see that the turn order is not going to change for the next turn. On the next turn, the turn order is again going to be the Wei, Wu, and Shu players' order for the turn. Don't forget though, when you're trying to figure out the total amount of bids won by every single player, include any bids won for battle spaces, and also include if you manage to put 100 generals on one of the improved tribal relations. Even though these locations are not contested between you and the other players, it is still considered a one bid. So if I put one unit here and I put one general over here who happen to have an army with them that happen to be trained, because only trained armies with equipped weapons can go out on the battlefield with these generals. You cannot send an army out there without a weapon, and you cannot send an untrained army out there. They have to be trained and they have to possess a weapon. But if this was the example in this case, we would see that we have won 1, 2, 3, and a total of 4 bids, which means the player order would still stay the same in this case. But let's just say the blue player lost an auction here, and they lost another auction somehow like this. We would see that the red player has won 4 bids. They would now be player number 1. Green has won 3 bids. They will become player number 2. And blue would win 2 bids, making them player 3 in the next turn, which means that they will control the alliance token on the next turn. And also means that the Wei player would be in alliance with the Shu player during the next turn, meaning that they get to share the alliance space. Of course, we have to pick a new space on every single turn, because you can't pick the same space for your alliance every single turn. Now, alliances are very, very cool, because when you have an alliance space, both the players who happen to share the alliance can also share the benefits of that space. So if we happen to have green and blue currently in an alliance, green and blue can both take that location. The total bid for that location is going to be their combat value added together, since they're currently in an alliance. So our total bid strength is 2, plus 5 is a total of 7. And if these two allied players win the space, they both get to take advantage of the space. Whereas opposed, if players are not in alliance, you can't have 2 generals in the same space. So if you're not in alliance, you can't gain control of that location. You don't gain the benefits of that location at all. So that is the bonus of being in an alliance with another player. After all the players have figured out exactly which one of their action spaces they managed to win, the players in action order get to resolve all their actions, but they get to pick which actions they want to resolve in which order. And it's not mandatory to resolve all the actions either. So we see that we're resolving the action spaces as Wei, Wu, and Shu. So we're going to start with the Wei player, who gets to resolve the 2 action spaces they want. And again, we can resolve them in either order we like, depending on what kind of benefits we have from generals, from cards we have, such as separation cards or unification cards. Is up to us to decide. And as we resolve these spaces, we remove our generals from those locations. And if we add any popular support tokens, they're going to go back to the supply. After that player has handled all these locations, we're going to move to the next player in order, who is going to resolve every single one of the locations, returning their generals back to their supplies. Although this isn't mentioned in the rulebook, I always like to leave the general here for the improved tribal relations until the very end of the round, so I don't forget them. It's not mentioned in the rulebook, but that is something I like to do so I never forget it. And I'll explain to you why I do that when we get to that point in just a moment. So I'm going to leave this general here just as a nice reminder. And then if you have any generals in your battle spaces, they're also going to resolve also. So since we won this battle space with this general, we would see that we need to pick a location that can be conquered with military guys who happen to have spears, which is this location here only. So we would move into this location. Since we weren't opposed by another player, we won that space. And then we would get this victory point token. Now, if this general specializes in military men who happen to have spears, and we can take this general right here and look at his card, and we see that he specializes in crossbows and boats, so he does not specialize in military. So we know that he is going to get the victory point token as a 0. Although if we had taken this general and we had equipped him with, instead of having a spear, we decided to equip him with a crossbow before we came out there, which means we'd have to attack one of these 2 regions right here, which happen to be defendable or attackable with crossbows only. If we moved into those locations, we would take this victory point token, and since we specialize in crossbows, we would flip it up to as 1 victory point side, and then we need to decide if we want to put in our granary, which is going to help supply our armies with food, or if we want to put in our treasury, which is going to help pay the upkeep costs for our armies. Once we make that decision, it's a permanent decision. We cannot move that token out of that location. It'll either give us permanent marketplace gold to cover our armies, or it's going to give us permanent food to help cover the cost of feeding our armies. We do have to be careful, though, because every one of our armies, even though they're going to give us victory points, and we can never lose these spaces at all, they are going to be a drain on our economy, and it's a permanent drain on our economy, so we want to make sure we're not sending too many armies out there too quickly, because for every need that we cannot satisfy for our armies, it's going to be worth -3 victory points at the end of the game. So for every gold we're missing, and for every food we're missing, that's going to be 1 of these tokens for every time we're missing those benefits that we cannot pay for to keep those armies stationed in those locations. They'll never leave. They cannot be defeated by other players and knocked out, but they're going to be one heck of a drain on our economy. Now I'll just go over every one of these locations in the center of the board and tell you exactly what every one of these locations can accomplish for your empire as you're taking these locations, if you win them when the bidding comes to figure out during the resolution. This location is going to allow you to train 2 of your untrained armies and turn them into 2 trained armies. So if you currently happen to have 2 untrained armies in your supply, you're simply going to flip them over to their trained side, and now you have to add 2 trained armies to your empire, but you have to have 2 untrained armies to start with. The next location is going to be the recruit armies location, which basically allows you to grant your empire 2 untrained armies. You're basically going to take 2 untrained armies from the supply, add them to your own personal supply. The next location is demand tribute, which allows you to take 2 gold, or take 2 rice, or take 1 gold and 1 rice, or to add 1 untrained army into your empire. The next locations allow you to purchase 2 crossbows, or 2 boats, or 1 crossbow and 1 boat. Next location over here is the develop marketplace or collect tax, which is basically going to allow you to do one of 2 things. One, you can flip over one of your marketplace tokens, giving you a level 1 marketplace. Or if you happen to have at least 1 marketplace, you can decide to trade some of these in to add in permanent revenue to your empire. And that's going to be the collect tax option. If you decide to take the collect tax option, you're going to move as many of these marketplaces into your treasury as you like. These are going to give you permanent income for your empire. That's going to help you pay for your armies that are out there. And for every marketplace you don't move up during the collect tax action, is going to be permanently discarded, permanently removed from your board, but it's going to give you a temporary infusion of 4 gold into your empire. And sometimes when you need money very, very badly, sometimes that's something you have to do. But once you make that decision to collect those taxes, that's a permanent decision that you can never undo. So if we're looking at my empire, using the Wu player as an example right here, we're permanently having an income of 3 gold, which means we can support up to 3 armies out and about. But if we ever have 4 armies out and about, that means we need to be taking 1 gold from our personal supply every single turn. But I'll explain that when we get to the cleanup and resolution at the end of the phase. Just want to explain to you that having this is a very large decision on whether you want to get a long-term gratification or if you need an immediate infusion of money. The next location is the win popular support location, which is going to allow you to grant you one of these popular support tokens. Remember, these can be used one time and one time only. You're basically going to use them when you send one of your generals to a location. It's give you +1 to the bid value for that one general. And then once they're used, they're going to be removed, and they're a one-time use. Next thing we can do is we can try to control the Han Emperor. If we move this location with one of our generals, we're going to have to spend 1 gold, which is going to be taken out of our treasury. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to advance on our rank track. So if we're governors, we'll move to grand generals and move all the way up. And remember, the first person to become the emperor, not only do they get 5 victory points, but they're also going to bring about the endgame condition, which will create the last round of the game. And then finally, whichever general you moved over to this location and claim this location is going to be turned face down and left at this location, meaning you don't have access to this general during the next round during the conflict resolution, and you won't get this general back until we get to the resolution phase, where they're going to be pulled off and added back to your supply to be used on future rounds. So getting control of the Han Emperor can be nice because it's going to give you this benefit right here, which acts like a popular support token. It gives you +1 on your votes as long as you can keep control of this. And remember, this is going to go back to the general supply at the end of every single round unless somebody else takes control of it. But at the end of the game, this is also going to be worth 2 extra victory points if you manage to hold on to it at the end of the game. Next thing we have is to produce spears and horses. You can take 2 spears, 2 horses, or 1 of each. Next thing we do is we can develop a farm, which means we take one of our farms and flip it over to get a level 1 farm, or we can decide that we're going to harvest. And a harvesting is just exactly like collecting taxes. We're going to take as many development farms as we currently have, and we're going to move up as many as we want. Any that we don't move up are going to be permanently removed from the game. We don't have access to them, and they're going to give us 5 rice to add to our empire, and that can give us a temporary infusion. So we need to make a decision on long-term gains of long-term food production or a temporary infusion of food to help us pay for our armies if that's what we need to do. Do note that when you get this, though, we still have a level 3 farm here. We still have a level 3 marketplace, even though we only have 2 tokens in our respective treasury and our respective granaries. The next thing we have is we have the trade rice and or weapon space, and it's a one or the other type of thing. We can either trade 4 rice for 5 gold, and we do that 3 times, or we can trade 3 gold for 4 rice, and we can do that 3 times. Once we do or do not do that action, we can move on to the other option, where we take 3 of the same weapons and trade that in for 7 gold. We can do that twice, or we take 5 gold and trade that in for 3 weapons of our choice, and we do that 2 times. The next bait we have is our construct state enhancement, and these are enhancement cards, our separation state enhancement card, and our unification state enhancement card. Now every one of these cards is going to give us victory points at the end of the game, and every one of these cards is going to have a cost to bring them into play, and every one of these cards is going to have a special power attached to them. Now remember, the unification cards are going to give our empire extra special powers, and the separation cards are going to give us extra ways to earn victory points at the end of the game. But most of these separation cards have a special requirements that get harder and harder to achieve as the game goes on. Most of these unification cards don't have a requirement, but the ones that do, those requirements become easier and easier to obtain as the game goes on. And the way this is going to work is every one of these cards is going to have a name, some artwork, a certain cost on the right-hand side, how many victory points it's going to give you at the end of the game, and the various powers these cards are going to give you. And then when you have your separation cards, they're going to have the name of the card, artwork, the requirement that you have to make sure you have not done. So there's going to have a requirement, and if you've done where this requirement is, you cannot put this card into play anymore. It's going to give you a special result and the special amount of resources you need to spend to get this card into play, and how many victory points that card is going to give you at the end of the game. So remember, separation cards, this is the trick of the game. They get harder and harder to get into play as the game goes on, but they give you extra victory points, while the unification cards give you extra special powers. So the sooner you bring them into play, the longer you're going to gain the benefits of those cards. It's a nice juggling and a nice bit of balancing act, and it can make some very, very tough decisions during the game. The final location is the hire instructor and or import technology, which is basically you're going to allow you to spend 1 rice, and that's going to allow you to train 2 untrained armies and turn them into trained armies. And then after that, you can, if you like, you can take 1 unification card or you can take 1 separation card. It's your choice. It's up to you. You can take 1 of either stack. Now remember, these are all these basic spaces, but remember there's tons of generals which are going to break all these rules. Every one of these generals has a special power, and every one of them is going to allow you to break some of the rules. Some of the generals will allow you to go to the recruit army space. Instead of taking 2 armies, you're going to gain 3 armies. Some generals might allow you to get extra food just by visiting this location with that specific general. Some of them are going to allow you to get extra win popular support tokens when you visit that location. Just remember, it would not be worthwhile for me to go through an entire list of all these generals. Just realize that there are tons of generals in the game. They all change up the rules a little bit, and they all break the rules in certain special ways. The next contested spot we have are the battle spaces. Now remember, I must emphasize this so you don't forget, the Wu player can only battle for this battle location and for this battle location, which means they can only fight for these 10 provinces. The Wei player can only battle for this location and this location, which means they can only fight for these 10 provinces. And finally, the Shu player can only battle for this location and this location, meaning they can only access these 10 provinces and those 10 locations only. And if you ever forget, there's a flag for every one of the nations, letting you know which nations can fight in every one of those battle locations. And the way a battle is going to be completed is every single player is going to place down a general. Now they can play down a general alone, or they can play down a general with a trained army that happens to be equipped with some weapon of some kind. Now you can put as many armies into play as you want as your general will allow you. So for example, this general right here allows me to put 2 armies into play. Again, they have to be trained armies, and they both have to be equipped with the exact same weapon. They cannot be equipped with different weapons. It has to be the exact same weapon. Now I don't have to put 2 armies in there, but if I put more armies in there, I have a greater chance of winning. I'm going to get more victory points out of it, but it's going to put a greater drain on my economy. I can also put in more generals if I want, and the extra generals can or cannot have armies if they wish. They don't have to, but they are going to add to my total attack strength, and I'm going to compare my attack strength to the total strength of the defender, and whoever has the higher amount is going to win that location. So if we have in this example right here, we have this general equipped with these crossbowmen and this general who has no armies with him. We have this general who has no armies, and this general right here who happens to have 2 armies with him armed with spears. We're going to add up the total combat value of both of our generals on each side, plus we're going to get 1 point for every single armed army we're going to have with that general. So we have a 4 combat plus a 4 combat plus 2 armies is a total of 10, while this player has a 3 combat with 1 army plus a 1 combat, so we have a total of 5 strength for this player. This player would have lost the space when we did the bidding because they did not have enough strength to take this place. So when we did the bidding resolution, this player would have removed all of their generals from that location. And then this player gets to move 1 and only 1 of their winning generals into the location that matches the weapons. So this general who happens to have spears can pick this location over here. And the other general, even if they happen to have weapons with them, cannot take that location because you can only take 1 of these battle locations per turn. And as a matter of fact, there's one other requirement. you cannot take one battle location until you've taken the other battle location already. So if I had not taken this battle location already, this battle location was still controlled by all these players, I cannot move this second general into any of these locations yet because I have not conquered at least one of these locations over here. So once I've conquered at least one of these locations over here, I can then start battling for these locations over here. And then once I've controlled at least one province and both of my battle locations, I can start fighting for either of these locations at my whim. It does not matter. The requirement is that I cannot take one battle side until I've managed to take the other battle side at least once. So once I've taken this location, I can start fighting for here. But until I've taken this location, I cannot get my second location on this battle line. That's very, very important, and it's something that you have to be very, very careful of, because another player can cause you a lot of problems if you happen to go on multiple battlefronts, attacking multiple locations, and if you don't happen to win the battles in the right order, you may waste your time going against those locations and sell yourself short. So let's say I was coming against this location right here and this location right here. The blue player had decided that they want to stop me on this front right here by moving all the generals in and moving in with an army. And I have a total attack strength of 6, and this player has a total defense or attack strength of 2 plus 3 is 5 plus 1 more is 6 plus 1 more is 7, so they have a total attack strength of 7. Their 7 beats my 6 over here, so I've lost this battle. So even though I'm not opposed over here by the Shu player, I cannot move in and take one of these provinces over here because I cannot take my second battle location until I've won at least one battle location over here. So the Wei player has effectively protected the Shu player just by coming over here and stopping me, whereas opposed if I was not stopped, because I can resolve these locations in any order I like, I can resolve this location first, take this location, then resolve this battlefield over here and take this location, and be 3 out of 5 locations closer to bringing about the endgame. Once all the players have resolved all their actions for their generals in the center and all their generals for all their battles, and resolve their improved tribal reputation, if they want to, they're going to take a penalty if they don't improve their tribal relations. And this is why I like to leave my general here as a nice reminder so I don't forget, because on every single turn that you do not place at least one general at your improved tribal relations location, if you don't do that on turn, your tribal relations level is going to go down by 1 point. And if your tribal relations level ever gets to 1, as soon as it reaches 1, you're going to get a -3 victory point token added to your empire. And for every single turn your tribal relations remains at 1, you're going to continue getting these -3 tokens. And these -3 tokens, even though there's only 5 or 7 of them available in the box, they are an unlimited supply, so you can keep gaining these as long as you keep continuing to ignore your tribal relations. So you need to make sure your tribal relations never gets down to 1, because as soon as it does, you're going to start getting lots of penalties. Now, if you ever move one of your generals over here to improve your tribal relations, and you can move them there with either one army, and remember your armies have to be armed with weapons, and if you put your general over there, both your armies have to again be equipped with the exact same weapon. If you put an army there with a general and you put 2 armies there, your tribal relations is going to go up 2 points. If you put a general there with only 1 army, your tribal relations is only going to go up 1 point. And if you put a general there with nothing at all, your tribal relations is going to stay the same, and it's not going to go down at the end of the round. Now, if you want to, if you don't have armies to put forward there, you can also decide to spend gold on keeping your tribal relations up. It's either spending gold or using armies. The difference is, though, if I use gold instead of armies, the gold is going to go back to the supply after I spend it, whereas armies are going to come back to my own personal supply, meaning I can use those armies on future turns to keep my tribal relations or even go to battle. Once all the players have figured out they're going to take a penalty for not improving their tribal relations, the only thing left to do before you end of the round is to look at all your generals and every single one of your generals and figure out if any of them have an end of round power. If any of them have an end of round power, you're going to use an end of round power immediately, and that's going to finish the round, and then you move into the upkeep and maintenance phase of the turn. During the upkeep and maintenance, you're simply going to flip over the token for the win popular support, and then you're going to flip over the token for the control Han Emperor, meaning that these are now opposite of what they needed before. So before, control Han Emperor was an administrative requirement. Now it's going to be a combat requirement. Win popular support was combat, but now it's going to be administrative for the next round. Next thing we're going to do is if you won the control Han Emperor token, you're going to add it to your empire at this point if you won that location. If nobody won that location, it's going to be returned to the center of the board, available for the next player who moves in there and takes it. And then every single player needs to pay the upkeep for their empire. Now the upkeep for your empire is just going to cost you 2 rice, one rice for every 2 popular support tokens you have in your personal supply. So if you have 1, it's not going to cost you anything. If you have 2, it's going to cost you 1 rice. If you have 3, it's still going to cost you 1 rice. If you happen to have 4 of them in your supply, it's going to cost you 2 rice, and so on and so on. After you pay for any popular support tokens, you need to pay for any armies you have out on the board. Now, I must emphasize you have to pay for armies, not just for generals, because remember, some generals can lead multiple armies. So if we see right here, the Wu player currently has 2 armies right here with this general, 1 army here, and 1 army here. So that means we need to produce at least 4 money or 4 gold, and we need to produce at least 4 food to keep our armies fed. So we see that we currently have 3 tokens in our granary locations. So that covers 3 of the 4 granary requirements, and we also have 3 of the 4 marketplace coverings. So we need to pay for all of our armies by spending 1 gold, which is the deficit here, and then we spend 1 food, which is the other end of the deficit. Now, for every deficit that you cannot cover, you're going to take one of these -3 victory point tokens, and that does mean that if we need to spend 3 food and we cannot afford 3 food, we would take 3 -3 victory point tokens, and these will add up. And like I said, don't forget, these armies can become a huge drain on your empire if you don't build smart and get your granaries built up quickly and help covering the cost of what it costs to keep your empire running, because everything gets very, very expensive to keep these armies going. The nice thing about the drain of these armies, though, is after you pay for all of them, you're going to gain victory points for every single army you have on the board. Now, again, it's every single army, not every single general. So again, in the Wu player's example, at the end of the round, they're going to gain 4 victory points because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 armies, so we're going to go all the way up to 4 victory points. So you can see that having armies is a great way to earn victory points in this game, as long as you can pay for them and keep them fed and keep them clothed by having the money and the food to keep them out in those locations. Finally, the only thing left to do is to advance the round marker and you're ready to start the next round. Now, here's one important thing to ever forget. If the game is brought to an end during the current round, whether somebody gets to level 5 on the rank track, whether we get to the end of round 12, or whether somebody gets all 5 of their granaries and all 5 of their marketplaces into play, or somebody manages to get 5 generals out on the board, that round's going to end before we get to the upkeep and maintenance. The game is going to come to an end immediately right before the upkeep and maintenance, so you don't have to pay upkeep and maintenance on the final round of the game. If this does happen to be the ending round of the game, the only thing left to do after you do the final round of the game is to figure out the victory points for all the players. You're simply going to add up all the military for all the players. That's going to be the amount of victory points they get for that. Then the players are going to figure out how many victory points they get for their borders. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to compare how many of the border locations you have managed to conquer versus your opponent. Now, whoever has the more conquered is going to get control and get the more majority of the victory points for having that location. And the way this is going to work is you're going to compare how many locations you have compared to your opponent on the 2 locations that you can currently compete for. And whoever gets the most is going to be the one who's going to gain the most amount of victory points for doing so. So for the Wu player, we'd figure out how many locations we've managed to conquer. We figured out over on this battlefield that we've won 2. Our opponent has only won 1. So we have won this location. Whereas opposed, we looked over this location, we see that we've won 1 location, but our opponent has won 2 of the locations, so they've managed to win more locations than us. So we're simply going to look at our chart, and we're going to figure out how many victory points we get based on whether we won, tied, or lost. That's going to give us the amount of victory points for our total military on that aspect. Next, we're going to get victory points for any one of these victory point tokens we managed to get from conquering these various regions out there on the locations. Next, we're going to get victory points based on whoever was able to most efficiently develop their granaries and their marketplaces. Whoever did the most is going to get the most amount of victory points. Next thing we need to do is figure out the civil harmony, which means we're going to get victory points for having the most best relations with the tribes, plus some bonus victory points if we manage to get highest on the track there. Next thing we're going to do is get victory points for having the highest rank. After we figure out our rank, we're going to get extra victory points if we currently control the Han Emperor token, which is going to give us 2 extra victory points. Then we're going to get victory points for all the state enhancement cards we managed to add to our empire, and they're all going to be loaded or listed on the bottom right of the card, plus any bonuses we managed to get from the separation cards themselves. They'll all be listed right there. Finally, we're going to lose victory points for any deficit tokens we happen to have. After that, we're simply going to add up all our victory points. Whoever has the most victory points wins the game. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial video for Three Kingdoms Redux. Now, I know this game can seem a little bit complex, but thanks to some really fantastic graphic design and a lot of very easy to understand icons all across the board, the game is actually not that difficult to understand. It pretty much takes about 1 round for all the players who are new to the game to figure out exactly what they need to do and how everything works out. The trick, though, is figuring out how to do everything efficiently, because with all the powers of all the generals, all the powerful powers of the state cards, it can be very difficult to find the right strategies. So you need to make sure you're concentrating on what you want to do very efficiently in this game, because the person who can't concentrate efficiently and tries to do everything is going to fail at everything that they're trying to do. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial video. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them in the YouTube comments down below. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews, that's otsbgr@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this video series and you want to see more like it, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching. But we'll explain that when we get to that. And of course, now we got to have a cat jump in. Spot number 2, and finally the Shu player is going to be player number 3, in the spot where the cat attacks the game board and jumps up on the board and comes up to say, "Hi!" Stealth attack.